listen for the word of God from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 15. We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that has been granted to the churches of Macedonia. For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry to the saints. And this, not merely as we expected. They gave themselves first to the Lord, and by the will of God, to us, so that we might urge Titus that, as he had already made a beginning, so he should also complete this generous undertaking among you. Now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you, so we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I do not say this as a commandment, but I am testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter, I am giving my advice. It is appropriate for you, who began last year not only to do something, but even to desire to do something. Now finish doing that, so that your eagerness may be matched by completing it according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. I do not mean that there should be relief for others and pressure on you, but it is a question of a fair balance between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance may be for your need, in order that there may be a fair balance. As it is written, the one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little. Here ends the lesson.
One of my first experiences that I can remember is when I was 5 years old. My father was working for Ohio State, and he had a new graduate student of engineering that he was supervising in the energy management department. This man, Mr. Wazid, and his family had just immigrated to the United States from Bangladesh. As Mr. Wazid explained it, my dad had been a great help to him in adjusting to the area and wanted to show his gratitude by inviting us all to his home to meet his family and have a meal together. Well, as you can imagine, their home was small, only a 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown area where a lot of international university students were living. Although we were crammed into this small apartment, and we did have an awkward time because of the language barrier, it was still wonderful. Mrs. Wazid could not speak any English except for the words, "You want?" He had a son that was a few years older than me, but also a daughter, Saba, who was my age. After dinner, she and I went outside to play soccer with her brother and the other neighborhood kids. I remember having a blast. After a while, my parents and I had to leave because we were so overly stuffed, and Mrs. Wazid kept wanting to give us more. She didn't understand the English word of no or stuffed. Despite all of our hand gestures of pointing to our stomach that yes, we were very full, thank you, we could only eat so much. There were so many dishes coming out of that teeny tiny kitchen, we literally wondered where it all came from. However, before we could leave, we were each given a gift, along with our leftovers. Again, she didn't understand the word no. My gift at 5 years old wasn't big or flashy. Some little bracelets from the dollar store that were beautifully wrapped. We knew they were running on a tight budget with their father in graduate school and the mother at home, picking up odd jobs, babysitting for the area. But they gave what they could. Saba and I continued our friendship since this time. Generosity can cross boundaries and make for awkward situations. While my family were the ones that had the means, the Wazid family still gave freely to us. They enjoyed giving to us because they felt as though my dad had given them the world and helping them and guiding them. Each of us had a very different and cultural understanding of what is considered enough. At that point in time, Mr. Wazid couldn't have thanked my dad enough. These dinners continued after that. I grew up going to them afterward. And I grew up with Saba, and we continued to play soccer together. We felt we couldn't appreciate their generosity enough every time we came together for these meals. It was truly a humbling experience. In writing his second letters to the community of Corinth, Paul was in his own awkward situation. He made promises to visit, but he could not keep them. And yet he still needed to ask them for their help. And he also needed to guide them in understanding how much is enough to provide for this fledgling church, the head church in Jerusalem, this growing movement of Christ followers, to keep it going. Now, the part of the 2 Corinthians is a fragment of one of the many letters that were written between Paul and the community of Corinth. We don't know what their response was, but we can only think to say that and wonder that they must have done something, because here we are today. We can assume that their following of Christ pulled their eagerness toward their generosity. They thought about the greater picture. How do our actions reflect our eagerness when it comes to serving God? Was it enough? Now, when it comes to talking about what is enough and what isn't enough, is always an awkward situation in the church. We even have our own text to suggest that. It's awkward because, well, generosity can be a fickle thing. It can leave us, while we want to be generous, we also want to have enough for our own means, for gas in our car, and for wants that we have with the money that we have legitimately earned. It's a balance that each of us need to discern for ourselves, as Paul reminded them. But to me, this also gets to a bigger issue of the church as a whole. Do our actions reflect our words? Do we walk the talk? I think, and as the church, Christianity as a whole, this has been the greatest sin that we have had in the past. We've been talking about the Reformation, of doing one thing and saying another, just like with the indulgences of the church back then that Martin Luther was upset about. It is this sin of saying one thing and doing another that unfortunately makes people, especially from my generation, the millennial generation, step back and wonder, why should I take part in this church? It's a church filled with hypocrites who say one thing and do another, who say that we need to be like Christ, and yet conveniently forget to care for those who need it the most. But I would say, in thinking about and reflecting upon my ministry here so far, there are so many moments that I can point to where we truly live the talk. And one aspect of this ministry that is not really talked about enough is our Apostles' Assistance Fund. To be honest, it can be a difficult task to decide what to do with this money. The Apostles' Assistance Fund is a discretionary fund for Pastor Kuhn and I to help those who call up during the week asking and are in need of help with a bill for a full tank of gas or for groceries. It can be difficult to decide how to spend this money because, as with anything, and I've experienced this in every church, there are people who always want to take advantage of the system. And talk to any office volunteer and they can tell you that we, like probably many other institutions and churches, have frequent flyers, as we like to call them. Each of them always calling every month, but each with a different story every month. And that can be wearing. It makes you not want to help. But then there are instances, like I had only a few weeks ago, of a woman who called into the church who was recovering from having a stroke and was in rehab. It must have been a minor enough stroke that she was able to and look forward to be able to go back to work. She was desperate. She told me that she was working with Tabor House and was trying to and needed to get her this month's rent in because she was not able to work because of her rehabilitation process. And so I helped her. 2 weeks later, I get a call from Tabor House about this same woman. They said that they had promised, and this was in it matched up with the story that this woman initially gave when she said that, Tabor House is going to cover my next month's rent, but I just need to get to next month. But then Tabor House called us and said, we can't cover this woman's rent. We didn't get the funding that we thought we would get. Can you help us? Can you help this woman again? And so I did. So oftentimes there are people in Lancaster that are literally on the edge of being homeless. They can maybe cover their bills, but then a medical emergency happens, and there goes their finances, or their car breaks down, or just one little thing can tip their finances upside down, and they are left on the street. Even though they are working, even though they are doing the best that they can. It is gratifying. And I am left awestruck of the people that come to our door, that come to our office in need of food, in need of a tank of gas. Pastor Kuhn and I primarily work through agencies such as Tabor House and TLC and the Lancaster County Council of Churches, and even local school districts with their social workers calling us to help clients of theirs with assistance. The truth is, even the smallest amount is just enough. It makes that line between will I have a home and can I get to work more bearable. Because with the system, as it is for those providing support, it can be overwhelming. And it requires you to fill out paperwork and wait. But waiting can be dangerous if you're on the edge. We are here to fill in the gaps of where the agencies cannot. It is just enough to make a difference in people's lives. This is only one instance in how we walk the talk and being there for our neighbor, just as Jesus taught us. This fragment of a letter that we read today to the community of Corinth from Paul leaves me wondering, how exactly did they respond? And it also makes me wonder, how do we as a church respond? Will you decide to walk the talk in following Christ according to your means? Amen.